So we're at the third step, constructing alternatives. So I defined the problem. I've assembled some evidence. And now I've got to figure out some alternative ways to deal with the problem. How do I construct alternatives, and how do I think about constructing alternatives?
Well, I say, to be pragmatic, you should certainly have on your list of alternatives all the ones that your client really likes.
Mm-hmm.
And also people who are important politically in the outside environment that are also interested, stuff that's being discussed politically. That's all part of the menu. But eventually you want to have at least one alternative that you're going to like. And that may not be stuff that your client's already thought of or it's already discussed in the environment. You may have to create it. It's going to be of your own design. And that's a hard job. But once it's done, that's not the end. You have to let it be compared to and compete with all the other alternatives that are on your list already. So but I would say that there's a sort of, since the Eightfold Path is kind of written as a decision primer, this creation of a new alternative is a bit different than the decision template. It requires you to be creative, imaginative, forward-looking. I would almost say aggressive in what you think you have to do as a way of a job.
So suppose my problem is to do something like improve the transportation system in a city. There's a sense that people can't get to work in a timely fashion. There's too much pollution. So maybe I've defined several problems there. But how would I begin to think about constructing alternatives? Do I have to actually model the transportation system, or is that a helpful thing to do?
Well, the word model is important, interesting, and valuable. Let me say what it does for us, and it has some limitations and can be misleading sometimes. The modeling thing is to try to figure out how the world is going to work eventually. And your alternative is an intervention in an existing system that's already there and going. And your alternative is really, I would say, it's an intervention strategy in a system. And so
So I build a new mass transit system, or I have lanes for cars with more than one people in them so that they can have
so
more
you
people
can
on the
take
highways.
If the whole problem fits nicely into a disciplinary boundary, you can take ideas from that discipline. You could say, what would an economist say about this problem? Chances are that economists will say, raise the price of something. Mm-hmm. They're always saying that, okay? And it's a piece of conventional and very appropriate wisdom. Frequently, just the world is just set up that way.
Or lower the price for people who are doing what you want them to do, like take multiple people to work.
Frequently, you see people, abusing what look to be like almost free goods out there in some way, and so the economist is always saying, raise the price. I'll tell you a joke. I was once teaching this IPA course with an economist, and we had this problem that the Oakland Zoo was alleged not to be taking good care of their animals. This was 40 years ago. And so the economist popped up and he said, elephants are being whipped, there should be a whipping tax. He was joking, but he had a point.
Got it.
The modeling. The whole point of modeling is sometimes it can be done very elegantly and very precisely with quantitative models and run on computers. But sometimes you can back up to something that's meant for common sense, qualitative, and metaphorical. Okay, metaphors are important. They often suggest things. Markets are a metaphor, and they suggest lots of things. Like they apply to lots of problems. Like for instance, somebody comes to you and says, "Look, we have a problem of too much crowding in the hospitals in our district." And crowding, congestion, the what the light bulb should go off in your head of supply markets, supply and demand. Too much demand relative to supply. We could decrease demand in some ways or increase supply. And how would you make these things equilibrate? The whole market metaphor is right there, ready to be grasped. Okay, so that suggests a lot of alternative intervention strategies. Now, it's not everything is going to have a natural metaphor behind it.
But analogies, too, are another way to think about it. If
Completely,
you're trying to
yeah.
understand a hospital, and you might want to look at how other institutions like hospitals operate and what they do to deal with certain kinds of problems that they have.
Yeah, the example in the book, which I really quite like, is how do you deal with with poor practice, even malpractice by medical practitioners? You don't just have to look at what the doctors are doing around the world. What does the law do? What does the Bar Association do, or whoever regulates in a state, legal practice? It's not doctors, but it's analogous, so you can learn about the structure of things. I should also mention here that Appendix B in this 4th edition is a list of things governments do. And it's about, 6 or 7 pages with 14 or 15 different, categories. You read through that list. It takes you half an hour most to read through the list and think, well, could this type of strategy be somehow used in this case? Chances are not. Mostly they're inappropriate. But you don't need them to all be appropriate. You just have to find one that works.
So it could be taxes, or it could be regulations, or it could be a subsidy.
Taxes, direct provision of services, and on and on.
On and on. So that is a great list, because it really does pretty much cover the waterfront of what the possibilities would be for constructing alternatives.
Now, I want to say one word about that. Some people would say, well, this is a very inelegant way to proceed. There should be a theory as to if this is the problem, this should be the solution, and you can have that to a certain degree. If it's an externality by microeconomic microspeak, taxation and regulation are sort of the usual instruments. Good. I don't trust the theories here. I think a half an hour of barnyard empiricism, roughly just going down the list, it's a small price.
And sometimes it'll allow you to come up with approaches which are different, but which actually might be better in the circumstance that you're in. I always like to think about, with litter, for example, one approach is to tax, bottle taxes and things like that. But another thing is a campaign where you put up signs that say, give a hoot, don't pollute, or don't mess with Texas, which was their approach. And then there's a third approach, which is to have the police go around and arrest people who litter. And so there's 3 quite different ways to deal with the problem of litter.
I have another one, which is, this has to do with bottles, not all litter, but, pay people who bring in bottles. Not just deposit, but forget deposit, that's just a revenue source. Just fund it out of whatever you like. Buy it up.
Right. So
Boy Scouts will do it.
Boy Scouts will do it, and homeless people will do it too, actually. And then you may have an effect of actually helping the homeless person get some income, and everybody feeling better about that very difficult problem. So that's the end of the construct alternatives, and we're about to go on to the next section.